Good evening, our Patriot family, and welcome to a special edition of the Fight for Patriotism, where we will be discussing the possibilities of what if John and Robert Kennedy lived, and what our country would look like if they did. I'm your producer, host, and brother ▲ and with me is your brother Angry Conservative. I'll say the Bible verse of the day, play my introduction, and then I'll check on how our brother is doing. The Bible verse of Wednesday, August 10th, 2022 is, "So that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. One part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it." 1 Corinthians 12:25-27 NIV.
We need you now. We need you now. One day, one day, one day, I hope you see the truth. This puppet show stays on because of you. We've been dancing with the devil way too long. I know it's fun, but get ready to pay your dues. Oh God, come back home. This crazy world is filled with liars and abusers. We need you now before we're too far gone. I hope one day they finally see the truth. God, we need you now.
How are you doing tonight, brother?
I'm doing well, Zach. How are you doing? And Zach, I got a quick question for you and for everyone down in that chat, down in the chat. What would it be like if JFK and RFK were still alive? What do you think it would be like right now in the United States of America?
I'm doing great, thank you for asking. And well, Angry, to answer your question, I feel like if John and Robert Kennedy weren't assassinated, I believe that we wouldn't be in the mess that we are in today. I believe they were on a mission to stop the cabal and everything to make America a beautiful country. They weren't about the slimy establishment that the government wanted. They wanted to have us prosper, in my humble opinion.
Brother, I totally agree with you. But the thing about it, yes, we are going down this road tonight. And if anyone hasn't realized, the question that I was speaking of the last couple of weeks on Wednesday nights was this question, because I knew all about all the videos Mr. Zach had, because he's been showing me what he was going to do with this. But this is an important question. We can think about what it was like, but we really will never know because of what's happened. So, and Mayhem, I totally agree with you on that one. I totally agree with you. And that's why the last couple of weeks, even though I had known it's coming, that's why I haven't asked it. As you can tell, the video from yesterday, that me and Zach did yesterday. That little short one. We knew, me and him talked about doing that from the very first week because we were like, we wanted to give you a hint to think about your answer for tonight. So that's why we're doing it the way we're doing this. And maybe it won't be too, I don't know how long this is going to go, but the last couple of weeks, it's been 2.5 hours. And hello, Tom, and hello, Mayhem, and everybody else down in the chat.
It will probably be around 90 minutes tonight.
All right. Zach, let's get started with the first. We're done. Hello, Canadian Patriot. Is the first one the JFK or RFK? Hey, Cindy. And yes, I'm saying RFK for a reason.
JFK.
All right, let's see what it would be like if President Kennedy was still alive today. That's an interesting. That's gonna be fun to watch. Let's get at it, Zach.
He is one of the most famous presidents in United States history. He was young and charismatic, and while JFK was quite a special figure in American politics, he was far more famous in death. The story of this man struck down so sudden in a public setting both horrified and captivated the world. Lots of people now ask the question, one that I'll try to answer as well. What if JFK was never assassinated? What if he continued to be president throughout most of the 1960s? What would be the effects on American society and maybe even the world? Looking back on the events of his presidency and historical facts, I'll try to predict how this alternate timeline may look if JFK indeed survived. When people imagine a world where JFK lived, it's basically a world where Lyndon Johnson was not president. When Kennedy was killed, LBJ was put into the presidency. While both shared similar domestic views, their qualities as politicians would create much different results for the US. So in this scenario, the most accurate thing to do is ask what Kennedy could have done differently that Johnson wouldn't have, while also looking at the significance Johnson played to shape America today. The 1960s was dominated with racial violence and the rapid growth of the civil rights movement. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. had been advocating for an end to segregation and other unfair practices since the 1950s. JFK sympathized with the struggle of the black population, even calling the wife of MLK after his arrest and then pressuring for his release. However, Kennedy was never truly vocal about it until the last few months of his presidency. Why was this? He was worried about losing the support of white Southern Democrats, focused on the upcoming 1964 election. When he did eventually speak up for civil rights, he argued the debate as a moral one, stressing that if America truly was free, we would treat every American as equal. Public segregation was still in effect across the United States, 10 years after Brown versus Board of Education banned it in public schools. Whites from both the North and South didn't want to integrate. His legislation, the Civil Rights Act, was not only to ban segregation in public, but to use the federal government to protect the rights of all races, genders, etc. However, he never got to see his bill pass, as he was killed while it was in committee. It wasn't until LBJ's presidency the following year where the bill was finally passed. So in this alternate timeline where JFK never dies, what happens? The civil rights movement might have actually been set back. Why is this? JFK's relationship with Congress was rough to begin with. He beat out Nixon by the slimmest of margins in the election. He hardly related to the aging Congress, and by his death, his Civil Rights Act was in limbo in the Rules Committee, where it was basically held hostage, planned to never move forward. However, Kennedy's death changed all that. It removed a Northern Democrat from the office and replaced him with a Southern Democrat, LBJ. This fundamental shift, ironically, saved Kennedy's bill. Johnson carried the torch left by Kennedy, and he was much more vocal about minority rights than even JFK was. He didn't care about stepping on toes to twist. Just 5 days after JFK's death, LBJ rallied for the passing of the Civil Rights Act, saying that by not doing so would disrespect Kennedy's memory. LBJ had one thing Kennedy didn't: influence. He had history inside Congress and knew how it worked. He navigated around the tricks they would use. He used his famous Johnson treatment, standing over to convince or straight up intimidate to get those on his side, even telling one opponent of the bill, "If you get in the way, I'm going to run you down." And even after all the political games, navigations, and techniques by the Johnson administration, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 barely passed after 83 days of filibuster. In this alternate timeline, Kennedy would not have the political influence or power to push such a bill through. It took all the skill of a well-connected Southern Democrat to pass it. A disliked Northerner wouldn't have had a chance. The act would have either taken much longer, died while in committee, or be considerably weaker than in our timeline. Because of this, MLK and other civil rights leaders would still rally for reform against segregation. Without the federal power to force the states to stop Jim Crow laws, protests and racial violence would be more drawn out. We would see more police crackdown, firebombings, assassinations, basically just a bloodier path for ending segregation that would have been passed quicker in our timeline. In this alternate timeline, without the Civil Rights Act, bills like the Voting Rights Act and Title IX would arrive later than in our timeline. They would still occur. However, if Kennedy was still alive, the civil rights movement would have taken a step back simply because JFK didn't have the influence Johnson had. Speaking of Johnson's influence in Congress, LBJ's presidency brought on a lot of immense change to the United States. He used the same tactics for his new legislation reforms, declaring a war on poverty and creating programs for his great society, very similar to FDR with the New Deal. Johnson's administration directly led to Medicaid, Medicare, PBS, expanded Social Security, created the National Endowment of the Arts, and numerous conservation and housing projects. In this alternate timeline, Kennedy would call for a war on poverty as well. He planned to do the same efforts as Johnson once he was reelected. Johnson's policies were actually just continued plans of JFK's. However, Kennedy never would have expanded his reforms as drastically as LBJ had. Kennedy would have easily defeated the Republican Barry Goldwater in the 1964 election. This is without a doubt. Goldwater's Cold War attitude scared many in the US, and in our timeline, it led Johnson to win in one of the most lopsided victories in United States history. Kennedy would have won as well, and stayed president until 1968. You can't talk about JFK without how he would have handled Vietnam. Would the war have even happened? Or would he have fell into the same trap Johnson did and sent American troops into Southeast Asia? Well, let's look at Kennedy's mindset during the presidency. Kennedy never wanted to get into Vietnam. He never wanted to involve American troops in a direct war against the North. But JFK wasn't a pushover either. He was a hardline anti-communist, but a realist in return. He knew not every situation resulted in an American victory, but would go through the best efforts to prevent communist expansion in the process. Not be understated how much Kennedy distrusted his military advisors. He often went against their opinions, aiming for more peaceful routes. This can be seen in Laos and Cuba, where he didn't escalate the situation to war. Each time, JFK did his own thing. In this alternate timeline, since John F. Kennedy lives to face the greater challenge of Vietnam, the U.S. never gets itself completely involved in the war. JFK distrusted his generals and their over-optimism in conflict. He saw the dangers such a political quagmire would bring. Kennedy tried his hardest to downplay the situation in Vietnam. He knew that the public would quickly call for a war if the communists got the upper hand. He was right. Today we forget how fast Americans rallied for war in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, the document that started American involvement, passed overwhelmingly in Congress. Good thing we don't have that rash thinking anymore. It just wasn't in Kennedy's personality as a leader to escalate the situation so far that Lyndon Johnson did. Of course, he was a believer in the domino theory and saw the threat North Vietnam posed, but if the war still came, it would have been different. The massive bombing runs, search and destroy, body counts, that was Johnson's solution, not Kennedy's. Even with full American effort to deter North Vietnam, the South would have fell anyway. JFK would have been the president that lost South Vietnam. I imagine on this alternate timeline, it would be a hot debate today whether America should have gotten involved. From a simple human cost, over 60,000 American soldiers and countless Vietnamese don't die in the fighting. Of course, conservative Vietnamese still die, but not at the level as in our timeline. Without the Vietnam War, the relationship between U.S. citizens and the government is different. The images that they saw every night were not supporting the story of a successful war the Johnson administration boasted. hippie movement, or more accurately, counterculture of the 1960s, would still have existed. Counterculture was created by many different factors, from civil rights, feminism, to simple rebellion against the Leave It to Beaver family of the 1950s. Sorry, Nixon, hippies still would have existed. However, the anti-war movement against Vietnam expanded counterculture to college kids and young people, those personally affected by the draft. Without the war, this counterculture would have taken much longer to appear in American society. In this alternate timeline, it's likely Johnson and Nixon would both run for the presidency. However, it's difficult to predict who would win. Much of the scenario becomes extremely complex, too much for the size of this video. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. Why was Kennedy so significant? He only served around 2 years in office. How did he leave such a lasting impact? I believe it was because Kennedy embodied the hopeful future of America. Resilient, clever, his dream was America's dream, but his sudden tragic end put an end to that and brought on the reality. Following JFK's death, there was certainly a change. The race riots, culture shift, Americans bogged down overseas. The 60s and 70s were tough decades for the United States. And so looking back, it's not difficult to see JFK as that last glimmering hope of what could have been. There certainly was lots of progress after his death, but there was also certainly lots of distrust, tension, and rebellion as well. Maybe things would have been different had JFK lived. We'll never truly know. This is just one scenario out of the countless possibilities. Like on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.
Hey guys, I'm Chris, and here is my list of the top 10 deadliest assassins. Now, for the record, I'm talking about actual contract killers whose profession is killing discreetly. It's as much about the style and success of the killing as it is how many people they actually kill.
That would have been interesting, Zach. If LBJ was never president, I think we wouldn't have the corruption right now in DC. That's just my belief. And Zach, do you want me to say something that we were talking about in private? All the people that are on the main channel, this is not for the people on number 2. This is just the main channel, the Fight for Patriotism main channel. Please, a link will be given to you. Please go over to the second to the Fight for Patriotism number 2, because we are shutting down the main channel. We started on that channel because we're trying to get more people. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the second one, please do so when you get over there. And here is the link for the second channel for the actual stream. Please, everyone click on that link, go over to the backup channel. That way we can have everyone over there. We are trying to get more people to subscribe to the backup channel because Zach is going to be on the backup channel more than what he is on the main channel until the strikes go away. So please. Thank you everybody for coming over. We appreciate this. That we're trying to get Zach more subscribers on this backup channel. I'm trying to help my buddy out. He's a good guy and everything. All right. And now, if you would please hit that like. When you come over to this one, please hit that like button for our brother, because we do need them likes up. All right. But I will say this for Zach. Thank you for subscribing to the backup channel, because most people don't know that the backup channel is actually here. So we're trying to get him more people over here, trying to get him as many as what's on the main channel. Hey, Sharon Mercer.
Thank you, guys, and I'll be shut.
Go
Thank
ahead,
you,
Zach.
guys, and I'll be shutting down number 1.
All right. But thank you, everybody, for coming and coming over to the backup channel. I'm trying to help my brother out, because, man, if you can actually see the back of the backstage, the private chat.